Well, welcome back to Tidepool Bookshop's Gilgamesh Summer Read Along. In this video today, I'll talk a little bit about Tablets 5 through 8 of the epic. And one of the great things about reading a classic work like Gilgamesh is that no matter how well you think you know it, something new always pops out. So I was ready to say some things here about Tablets 5 through 8 that I already knew or thought I knew. But it kind of doesn't seem necessary to go through the basic plot at this point. And I was really struck this time around by how many things were actually new to me. For instance, the fascination that the epic seems to have with counting and measuring things. The doors that Enkidu makes for the temple out of the cedar of Humbaba's forest. The weight and the holding capacity of the horns of the bull of heaven. It records the weight of the hero's axe earlier, the distance of his strides. And there are lists, too. The list of the winds that Shamash sends against Humbaba in Tablet 5, and the long list of funerary gifts that Gilgamesh lays out for Enkidu in Tablet 8. These stick out to me as very scribe-like ways of telling the story because, of course, every scribe who wrote literature and would have copied Gilgamesh had also already been trained and probably employed in the kinds of accounting and mathematics they needed to use in everyday life for administration, to make lists of people, lists of anything. Mesopotamian scribes are constantly making lists, counting up grain from the harvest and measuring the fields. So this measuringness seems very scribe-like to me. And I also don't know how I didn't see before that the text used so many motifs and narrative tricks that depend on reversals. For instance, when Gilgamesh makes himself dirty in order to mourn Enkidu, which reverses the grooming and cleanliness that Enkidu used to become civilized in the first place. Or when Gilgamesh taunts Ishtar in Tablet 6 with the long list of her lovers. See, another list. These lovers who suffered all these reversals of fortune because of the goddess's fickleness. Or when Enkidu suddenly longs to tear down the very temple tour that he built and dedicated in the first place because he's so frustrated by his fate. Or even when he's convinced to turn his curses back into blessings. There's a very subtle reversal in Tablet 6, for instance, where Gilgamesh asks Ishtar if she'll feed him bread fit for a god and pour ale fit for a king. And this sarcastically reverses the bread and ale which Shamhat served to Enkidu back in Tablet 1, and which is mentioned again in these same terms, fit for a god, fit for a king, in Tablet 7, when the sun god chastises Enkidu for his ingratitude. Mesopotamian literature depended on all these kinds of reversals of logic, fortune, and symbolism in everything from little motifs to whole plot narratives, partly for humor, partly for dramatic effect, and partly to highlight the apparent randomness of the world, which could really only be understood by the gods. So reversals show up in snippets as small as little proverbs, like, "My neighbor's ox eats grass, while my ox has no grass." This was very profound to them, and all the way up to whole plot devices in other long tales. Now, I did expect to find all kinds of references to rituals and knowledge arts that allude to scholarly texts, like when the bull of heaven is offered as a ritual sacrifice to the sun god, or in Tablet 8 when the statue of Enkidu is constructed very close to the recipe for building icons, divine icons of Mesopotamian gods. Or back in Tablet 4, where Enkidu draws a circle for Gilgamesh to lie in so that he can receive his dream omen. This relates to a very common ritual that we know of, drawing circles of flour, flour like for bread that you bake with. You make these circles to promote various kinds of divination, fortune telling. But what I hadn't been looking for, aside from those kinds of scholarly borrowings, were all kinds of literary references. And one of the best examples of this maybe comes in Tablet 6, lines 32 to 44, where Gilgamesh teases Ishtar in a series of rather confusing questions. These lines have the bearing and sound of other types of compositions that scribes also had to learn: debates, dialogues, proverbs, even lists of homonyms and synonyms in word lists that could be worked as puns and other kinds of wordplay. One of the most famous of these wordplays in the Gilgamesh epic comes all the way back in Tablet I, where Gilgamesh has a dream about an axe. And the Akkadian word for axe there is hatsinu. The word is a very near homonym for asinu, hatsinu and asinu. Asinu meaning a homosexual lover or companion, which points up Enkidu's status as something more than just a sidekick in the story, but a helpmeet, a soulmate, an equal, a companion befitting a great king like Gilgamesh, in the same way that the youth Hephaestion was for Alexander the Great. So with all these kinds of puns, large and small, the scribes are really drawing on their education, showing off their erudition in these little flourishes, sometimes reproducing whole little set pieces, miniature compositions within the body of the epic. But getting beyond these kind of tactical maneuvers, these clever little tricks that the story uses, which reveal it to be so much the product of an elite scribal circle, I was really arrested this time by how frequently, how many ways, the text emphasizes how close the heroes are to the gods themselves. Gilgamesh and Enkidu talk with the gods, they argue with them, they even fight them. Their powers are likened to those of the gods. Their very bodies are godlike and divine. Remember that Gilgamesh is said to be 2/3 a god. Gilgamesh is invited to be the lover of Ishtar, and Enkidu is reminded by Humbaba in his speech in Tablet V that they're both near divinities from the realm of the wilderness, who know and speak to the trees and the animals. Humbaba is a monster, but he's also among the divine, near divine creatures. And when Enkidu dies, his funerary statue, as I just mentioned, is a near analog of a divine icon that you would pray to. So why, I thought, does the story position the heroes so closely to the gods? Especially when the dramatic turn of the epic comes with the death of Enkidu in Tablets VII and VIII, death in all its finality, no different from that of a normal man, with all of the frustration and bewilderment that men face death with, and where the climax of the epic altogether in Tablet XI brings Gilgamesh precisely to the understanding of his mortality. So the whole epic underlines this point of the story is that they are not gods. Well, these two themes have to be related at some point. It seems exactly the fact that the heroes are this close to divinity that because of that, their deaths and sacrifices become so poignant and meaningful, that Enkidu teaches Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh will teach something to men. That they know the immortality and perfect knowledge that they can see, but not quite reach. The ultimate understanding of the distance between what they can perceive to be possible and what they're limited to. And this, I don't think this is just a way of kind of turning up the volume on the tragic aspect of the story that just makes it sadder. It points to the function that the heroes serve. Because it's not only that Gilgamesh knew all things, that he was just smart, it was that he brought that knowledge back to mankind, that he transmitted the knowledge that he brought back from before the Great Flood to serve as an example and a guide to the world of men, to be copied and retold over the centuries and millennia. That the epic itself is that message that he brought back. And in this way, Gilgamesh is a figure who's like Prometheus or even Jesus, who don't just die fighting a good fight for their own sake, but making an agonistic sacrifice for the benefit of mankind, giving purpose to the reader that the divinity he nearly reached and the humility he ultimately learned would remain ideals which readers could understand and emulate. And this probably relates to why in the latest part of Mesopotamian history, In the historical tradition, Gilgamesh was remembered not just as a kind of fighting hero, but as a wise sage among a very select, small set of people who brought knowledge from the deep prehistoric times. But maybe that's just another kind of hero, in a way. Okay, Tide Pool fans, we will be back soon with a final video about Gilgamesh. Thanks for playing.